Okay, my only real problem with talking about Oxygen is that I'll probably end up warbling more about the ideas it presents rather than the actual execution of it, because what it plays about with is incredibly interesting to me. It's the sort of thing that Big Finish do all the time, and it's the sort of thing I enjoy in books I read and stories that I write myself. I love me some sci-fi with messages and parallels to the real world, because I believe that sci-fi can help us understand the world around us and the problems we're presented with as mankind collectively progresses. So if I end up spending most of this review talking about that rather than the actual events and production of Oxygen, I can only apologise, but I've written the following letter outlining the case in my defence, which I'm going to read to you now. Okay. What did you fucking expect? It's me here. You knew what you were getting into when you clicked on this video, and it's your own time you're wasting. Anyway, so... about 11 years ago, The Impossible Planet aired, and I remember watching the episode of Doctor Who Confidential that came with it, where someone, can't remember who it was probably Russell, who explained that space travel in not just classic Who, but tons of sci-fi of the 60s, 70s and 80s was rarely, if ever, presented with a veneer of realism. And I could sort of see his point to a certain degree. I mean, you all know the stereotypes, it's all brilliant white corridors and stupidly efficient technology, whereas real-life space travel will always be marred with imperfections. Though following The Impossible Planet, nuwho's approach to that up until now was mostly just making spaceships and space stations look a bit gritty and grungy, and I just usually ended up feeling like they were trying too hard to come across as what a real-life futuristic spaceship might look like, when that's just the visual aesthetics. I couldn't see that many core ideas in there fleshing out a realistic future beyond just what you can see on screen. Whereas what Jamie Matheson's done in Oxygen is take some common criticisms of the capitalist system that we inhabit today and imagine how they might be transposed into the wider universe when space travel becomes commonplace. Because when anything becomes commonplace, you can guarantee that someone's going to try and make some money off of certain aspects of that experience. And when someone tries to make some money off of anything, somebody is going to do better than everyone else and attempt to corner the market, and lots of people are probably going to end up exploited as a result, owing to the fetishization of profit over people. It all depends on what's being produced or harboured for personal gain, of course, but in this case, what does every space traveller need? Oxygen. A company has privatised the very air that we breathe. The free market runs a part of human existence that we need in order to stay alive. Only when you set the science fiction context around this do you realise just how ludicrous the system that we live in actually is. 'Cause think here, how do you decide what's morally off limits to sell? What do you find fucking disgusting that someone would want to try and profit off of that? For example, I've always felt that railway stations that ask for 30p to use the toilet are exploitative. Like, how do you price someone's bladder? Do you lock someone out of being able to go for a piss if they haven't got 30p on them? I paid 70 fucking quid for this train ticket. Least you could do is let me go for a piss. I just think that's a bit of a cruel idea. And yet we don't find charging for other basic human necessities like food and water cruel. I buy food, I pay my water bill. And yet when we see a future where they put a price on oxygen in smart suits that cut you off automatically when you run out of credit, that's seen by the viewer as a step too far. And that is brilliant. Like, how do you justify that alongside the fact that you live in a system where you need money to have the things that you need in order to stay alive? Jamie's written some bloody beautiful sci-fi that really prods you into looking at the world around you and doing some mental gymnastics trying to unravel that moral quandary, which is everything I want from sci-fi, and I totally believe that this world is possible. They've got characters with no other alternative means of breathing here, because what are you going to breathe instead of oxygen? They're made to buy these smart suits that set parameters by which you can breathe, and meddling about with them with a sonic screwdriver can cause fines, even if you're just trying to stay alive, because we've turned the fundamental thing that humans need in order to survive into a fucking commodity. The smart suits are a great idea, by the way. Give them a trustworthy sounding name like smart suits, but what they're actually doing is holding the consumer in hostage to the seller. The consumers are vulnerable in a system that demands blind trust because they don't have any alternatives for this particular commodity. And Alright, I will admit here that it is very on the nose, heavy-handed and obvious. Which was why I threw a hissy fit over Kill the Moon. You present a moral dilemma with no simple answer, and we've got the Doctor essentially directly telling you how to interpret it. If I didn't at the very least acknowledge that, I'd be playing hypocrite. But the big and stupefyingly important difference is, I totally believe this scenario. While it does seem like a ludicrous idea, you'd have to be pretty naive to think that companies wouldn't want to charge you for oxygen in space in the future. Whereas I didn't believe Kill the Moon's moral play for a second, and also the pace of Kill the Moon got totally stuck around the 25-minute mark and fucking bored me to tears. Whereas Oxygen keeps a good pace throughout and never slows up. He's essentially written a traditional base under siege story and draped some huge and interesting ideas around it that work wonders to flesh out this future without really needing to show us much more of the bigger picture or the shady corporate power structure going on behind the scenes, because we've been given a pretty good idea of that just from the aspects of the scenario that we're presented with. The fact alone that we've got to this stage where it's cheaper to let human workers die than to provide them with oxygen says all it needs to about this vision of the future and the unseen villains of the piece. Oh, and I just loved the Doctor's solution to rig it so it's more expensive to let the crew die than to give them the oxygen that they need, because it kinda totally underlines Matheson's point here about how the fetishization of profit over people renders humans, the consumers of that product, expendable in the equation. And the suits remain functional after death, using the human bodies. It actually makes a scary amount of sense to employ space zombies in this situation, because it harks back to Romero's Dawn of the Dead using a zombie apocalypse as a metaphor for consumerism. The makeup effects work on the zombies is fucking gorgeous as well, by the way. Combining that with a great score and magnificent cinematography, these things look truly terrifying. I just love these shots of the group of them out in the vacuum of space. I can't imagine how shit scary some kids must have found this. Oh yeah, another thing I love was Bill's broken helmet and forcing the Doctor to go blind in order to save her. Having him severely debilitated in and by this story just further increases the tension and danger. And in itself, this being a result of a busted helmet is just a further criticism of how the free market doesn't necessarily guarantee that a system will work properly and you'll naturally get a better service for your money. I mean, yes, the fact the Doctor is now blind and hiding it from Bill for the foreseeable may end up compounding the narrative in future episodes. You guys have already seen them, so you'll be able to tell me about that one. But I do like that they've now given the Doctor a reason to wear those sunglasses. You know, like an actual narrative-based reason for it rather than just an aesthetic one. And yes, I know they were Sonic last season, so they were kind of narrative-based, but they didn't exactly do much for the stories. In fact, I probably wouldn't have remembered that he had those sunglasses last season at all if I hadn't made a point of complaining about them at the time. Oh yeah, another thing that shocked me was that Nardol's been turned into an actual character. This is definitely worth mentioning because I, like most people, have been complaining about how utterly pointless his characters appeared to be up until this point, but he was an active presence in pretty much the whole episode, and he actually offered some input into the story's progression and direction. His one-liners were relatively limited and surprisingly pretty funny.
Oh no, they're fine. What's stopping them?
This whole area's new. It's not in their mapping system.
You know, like when your sat-nav doesn't know a new road.
That and his purpose to keep the Doctor grounded and guarding the vault, alright, while I dislike the continued employment of the mystery box, it gives Nardole more of a purpose than the reason that he was in the Return of Dr. Mysterio, for example, where it's just, the Doctor might get lonely. Oh yeah, but one thing that I didn't really buy though was the wrap-up, where the Doctor reveals that space capitalism fell after this incident. When... really? That was all it took to kill capitalism. Yeah, I just felt the ending was a bit too eager to achieve closure is all. Overall though, while it has got its gaps and flaws, Oxygen is a fascinating exploration of ideas pertinent to our world that it plays about with by placing in a future setting. It's a sophisticated script, an absolutely jaw-dropping, almost flawless production, and also, it just really made me think. Hey everyone, so yeah, I just came for a bike ride out here to just sit here and breathe in the air around me and just take it all in. And this experience right here, right now, it's all free. no one's charging my credit card to just come out here and just sit and look at the woods and fields around me and just listen to the birds. It's all free. You could charge me for this. You could place any part of this experience behind the paywall. You could gate off this part of the woods and gate off this field, charge an entrance fee, monetize the oxygen. You could, I don't know, you could turn the birds' voice boxes off and have like a little remote that charges your credit card to turn the birds back on again. If someone decides that there's some money in it, you could charge for any aspect of any experience. Just sort of arbitrarily gate something off and charge people some money to turn it back on again. And ultimately, that's why I love sci-fi like Oxygen. It just really sets your world in perspective and the things that you take for granted. This experience of just sitting and just watching the world go by, it's all free. It's entirely free. Well, except for my bike, which cost me like 200 quid. So, and the clothes on my back, and yeah, nothing's free, is it? Fuck, I was certain I had a point here. Wasted the whole fucking afternoon. Fuck this shit. Well, at least I'll get some views out of it.